contest chairman, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. My name is Janet Kuester, and this is an icebreaker for me as well as my first contest ever here, so I'm so pleased to be here. So thank you. And I didn't really realize that I wasn't going to be using the lectern. So I did make some notes, and I'll try my best to do what I can do today. So you heard the title of my speech, and I have a few little stories that are true. I could not make these up. And one of the very first stories I have for you today is actually how I came to be. When I grew up, my parents were two of the most unlikely people to have ever met. In fact, most people told us they were so shy, they didn't even know how they had met. My father was the child of two alcoholics, and because of that, he was very, very shy, and he had a very, very bad stammer, so he was very, very quiet and didn't even like to talk to women. My mother had social phobias, and she was extremely shy, and she would rather sit home and read books than to dare go out of the house. So both of their families had pushed them to go to a dance one night, and that was how they met. So they were at the dance. Somehow they talked to each other. We don't know how that ever happened, but they did talk to each other. They began to dance, and then after that, they dated. So finally, it came to the point where they actually did get engaged, and they sat down one day to talk about family and whether or not they would have children. So my dad started first, and he said, I don't really like children. And my mother said, I don't really like them either. And so my mother turned to my father. She came from a very strong Catholic family, and she said, but I guess we'll have some anyway. So they did. They did have children. So fast forward, it's now their honeymoon, and they went to the Palmer House in Chicago, and they were on the 9th floor, and my father carried my mother through the threshold. And then he reached into his wallet, and he walked over to the window and opened it, and he pulled out some rubbers from his wallet, and he dropped them off the floor, off the window, into the street of Chicago, and he said to my mother, he turned to her and said, well, we don't need these anymore. So 9 months and 1 day after their wedding, I was born. So that was a story of how I came to be. And when they said they didn't like children much, they went on to have 6 more after that. So I came from a family of 7 children. My next story is when I was about 3 years old, and from what I understand, I was extremely resistant to toilet training. And my mother did everything she could with me, but she just couldn't figure out how to do this. And my father, by then, we all knew he sort of had a temper, and he said, I just can't stand this. When is she ever going to be toilet trained? He said, I can see her. She's going to be packing for college, and she's going to turn to you and say, have you packed my diapers? And so my mother turned to me after she told the story, and she said, one thing I was really glad to hear your father say was, you were going to college. So she was very happy about that, and of course I did get toilet trained. And so obviously, and so my next story is about, fast forward, I was about 8 years old at the time, and we were watching Leave It to Beaver, and we had television, and to us, this was the funniest comedy show we could have ever seen in our lives. We were watching Leave It to Beaver, and in walks the mother of this family, and she's dressed in a dress, and she has high heels on, and she's making breakfast for the kids. And then she says, have you got your lunch, boys? And she's sending them out into the world, goodbye. And they've had this warm breakfast, and they're having this conversation. And we were rolling on the floor laughing, because the way we knew breakfast to happen in our house was this. We would go to the kitchen, we'd wait for my mother, and she'd come in with the bathrobe and the slippers, and she'd come in, she'd take she couldn't cook really, and so she'd take some cereal out of the cupboard, and she'd pour it for everybody. And so one day, my mom walked into the kitchen. I was about 8 at the time, and so I got tired of waiting for her. So I just took the cereal, and I started dishing it out in the bowls to everybody. So she gets in the kitchen, and she looks at me, and she says, good, you can pour the cereal. I'm going back to bed. in my next story, I'm fast forwarding now. Now I'm 12 years old. And since I had been 5 years old, I had really, really, really wanted to play the piano. More than anything in the world, I wanted to play the piano. But my parents told me pretty much with all our kids and finances as they were, I was never going to get a chance to probably study a musical instrument ever. Well, a lot of things happened in life, and we did get an old upright piano, and I did get to take some piano lessons. So my mom had taken piano as a young girl, but she told me what happened was that she was taking lessons. She paged to the end of the book, and she said, "Oh my gosh, it looks so hard. I just don't think I'm going to be able to learn these." And she said to her mother, "I want to quit piano." So that was it for her. So one day I heard my mom trying to play a Beethoven sonatina, and my mom, and again, I'm a professional musician, and so now I understand much better. She just totally was arrhythmic. She could not keep rhythm, and she couldn't read rhythmic notation. She just sort of play any rhythm she wanted. So the Beethoven sonatina sounded like nothing I have ever heard in my life. So I said, Mom, it doesn't go like this. And so I sat down, and I was in 7th grade. I was sort of bossy and belligerent. I said, "This is the way it's played, Mom." And so I sat down at the piano, and I started playing it for her. And she says, "Well, Janet, you have your interpretation, and I have mine." So fast forward, here we are, junior high and high school. My 4 sisters and I, we're at the door of the kitchen, and we were all chubby. Everybody fought weight, and all the girls, we were all overweight. So my father brings us over the doorways, and he says, "Girls, I'm not making the doorways any wider." So my final story, I'm about 15 years old. Now I'm worried because I haven't had much of a date. I thought I'd never marry a guy. What am I going to do? And my mother sits me down one day. I was crying. I said, "I'm never going to get married. I'm too ugly. I'm fat. I wear glasses." And my mother said to me, "Janet, don't worry." She said, "For every ugly girl, there is an ugly boy." Thank you.